What is going on, guys? Welcome back to another Swift video. In today's video, we're going to be taking a look as to how to create a checkbox. So basically, we've got two examples here that we're going to be going through. The first one is just a circle that we can toggle on and off. Some people like this style, and the other one is a legitimate checkbox in which you actually get a check. So we'll take a look at how to set both of these up in reusable ways where we're not duplicating code in case you want to use these components across your app. We'll also take a look at how we can make this check be over the box, the square box if you want this style. And we'll also look at how you can adjust this if you want the check to fit inside, so on and so forth. So we'll also make sure that this supports dark mode fully and that it's dynamic and it looks awesome in both themes. So make sure you destroy the like button as per usual before we get started. Get Xcode ready, get excited. Let's talk about some checkboxes. All right, we're going to get started by opening up Xcode and creating a new project. We'll stick with the app template here, and let's go ahead and call this my checkbox. Make sure your language is Swift, interface is Storyboard, and Lifecycle UI Kit. Go ahead and continue. We'll save it to our desktop, and first things first, let's expand our Xcode window to give ourselves a little more room to work here. Let me also select the simulator that I've got open, which is the 12 Pro Max. Let's expand this side. And let's talk about how we're gonna build the checkbox. So as you saw, there are two styles that we're gonna be building. The first one is a simple circle that gets filled in when you tap it, and then unfilled when you tap it again, checking and unchecking it. And the second one actually shows a little check. So we're gonna build both, and we're gonna start off with the circular one. Now we wanna build these in a reusable way that you can use across your app, so we're not duplicating code. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna create them as custom views. So we'll do that by right-clicking this and hitting new file. And actually, before I do so, let me bump up the font size here so y'all can see it better. So we'll hit new file. We're gonna do a Cocoa Touch class, and we are going to do a subclass of a UI view. And here we're gonna give this a name. So let's go ahead and call this circular checkbox. I don't really know if you would call the circle one a checkbox, but since it's the simplest to understand, let's just go ahead and call it that. And let's get rid of this commented out code, add final there, so nobody can subclass it. And let's talk about this. So what is a circular checkbox? Well, all it really is a circle that you can tap in and tap in again to check and uncheck. So what do we need to do here? So the first thing we need to do is implement its initializer. So we're going to override init with frame, and we're simply going to call the super constructor for it. We're also going to bring in the other required initializer just like this. And what we want this to do is we want it to show a border, and we want it to be circular as well. So how do we add a border? So we're going to say layer, corner radius. This is how we're going to do the circular radius. And then for the border itself, we're going to say layer, border width, let's go with 0.5, and layer, border color, let's go with UI color, secondary label dot CG color, because this requires that core graphics color be assigned to it. And how do we get the corner radius? Well, to get it to be a circle, we want it to be half the width. So the corner radius is going to be the frame.size.width over 2.0. And that's basically how you make it a circular border. And by default, we want it to be the default background. So we're going to say the background color by default is going to be system background, just like that. And we also want a way for the user, once they tap it, to go ahead and update its state to be checked or unchecked. So we can do that in one of two ways. We can do it with a tap gesture recognizer, which is fairly simple, or we can do it through a dedicated function. So the dedicated function would be something like, we'll do a combination of both, I guess. So the dedicated function would be something like this, so set checked, and this would take in a checked, let's call it is checked, and this would be a bool value. And based on this, we would say if is checked, we're going to say background color. And here you can specify whatever color you want. We're going to go with system blue if it decides to autocomplete and be useful. And let's see, is checked, is checked. I forgot to add the if there. That's why it's not happy. There it goes. And otherwise, we're going to say background color is once again system background color. So let's go ahead and use this view. It's fairly simple. It's really a few lines of code, but let's see it in action. So we're going to go to our view controller. And similar to what you saw in the beginning here, I'm going to go ahead and firstly, let's hit that run button to get our app built and showing up here on the simulator. Hopefully it doesn't take too long. There it goes. All right, you should be greeted with your empty app in just a moment, just like that. And while it's doing that, let's go ahead and set up this view. So we're going to say let checkbox1 is going to be a circular checkbox with a frame. And here I'm going to give this an x and y of 0, 0 and a width of, let's say, let's do 70 by 70. So keep in mind that your width and height must be equal here for it to look like a circle. Otherwise, it's just going to look kind of strange. And let's actually change these x and y values. For the y, we'll say 200. And for the x, we'll go ahead and say 70. And I'm just going to, for the sake of making it look nice, put a label next to it as well. So we'll say this is a UI label with a frame. The x is going to be, let's see, 150. Y will be 200, width will be 200, and let's make the height 70 as well. And we're going to say label, I agree to your terms of service. So something that's fairly commonly used for a checkbox style UI. Let's make sure we add both of these as subviews. So we want the checkbox as well as a label. Go ahead and hit Command R to build and run. And we've got our label here, and right next to it, we have this fairly large circle. It's a little dim, the edges. We're gonna make it smaller in size, but right now when you tap it, nothing is happening. And the reason nothing is happening is because we need to hook up that set checked function. So I'm gonna go ahead and say checkbox1, add gesture recognizer. We're going to say gesture. And here we're going to say let gesture is a UI tap gesture recognizer. Just like that. And we're going to say target self. And action is going to be did tap checkbox, just like that. And here we are going to create this function, and let's go ahead and actually make this checkbox global in this class so we can reference it in other functions, just like that. And in here, we're going to go ahead and say checkbox set checked true. So you'll notice one problem in just a second. When we go ahead and tap it, all right, we checked it, but when we tap it again, we don't uncheck it. So that brings up the question of where do we keep the state of whether the checkbox is checked or not? So we could keep it here in the view controller and do it in some kind of fashion of var is checked. But if you think about it, this is actually kind of redundant. So instead of actually doing this at all, if we go back to the checkbox that we created, we're actually already passing it in here. So why don't we just save it in this class? So I'm going to say self.isChecked is checked. And here we're going to say self.isChecked. And we're going to go ahead and add this property in here for isChecked. And it's going to be a private isChecked. And by default, it'll be false. Now, if you want it to be defaulted true, of course, you can do that as well. But now we go ahead and check this. You see that it's actually still just staying filled in. And the reason that it's still staying filled in is because what we want to go ahead and do is get rid of this. And I'm going to change this function to be called toggle. And what we're going to do is we're going to assign isChecked to be the inverse of the current checked value, and then we're going to update the UI. So let's go back to the view controller. And here, instead of passing in true, we're simply going to say toggle. And what this is going to do is every time we tap it, it's going to flip between the states of isChecked. So this basically gives you the functionality of checking and unchecking. Now let's make the size of this a little smaller so it's not as obnoxiously large. We'll make this 40 by, whoops, that's the label. That's not what we want. We want the checkbox. We'll make this 40 by 40. And in the checkbox view, let's go ahead and change the border color too so it's a little more prominent. Let's go ahead and make this label. And you might be wondering why we're using label, and the reason, so now we're a little bit to the left, so we're gonna go ahead and change the frame over here so it looks appropriate. The reason we're using label is so it has nice dark mode support, which you'll see in just a moment. So let's go ahead and make the label height also be 40. And instead of being 150 from the left, we are going to have this be 115 on the x-axis from the left, and the label should be next to it now, just like that. And if we hit Command-Shift-A to enter dark mode, you'll notice that by default, the outline is not visible because it's a core graphics color, so we'd need to update it with a handler, but if you reopen the app, it renders correctly. So if you're wondering how to change that color for the border in the view, what you want to implement is trait collection change. So there's a function here, trait collections did change, and you want to override it and call trait collections did change. And your trait collection actually includes the update of the theme, light mode or dark mode. And what we can go ahead and do in here is say border color. And we can just paste that right there. And what this is going to go ahead and do is every time the trait collection changes, which is every time the theme changes, it's going to go ahead and reassign it. And now when you flip between the different states, your border is always a correct color. So cool, that was the first checkbox, fairly simple. Let's do the second one. And the second one will be fairly similar. So once again, right click, new file, and I'm going to go ahead and call this a checkbox button. And we could make it a UI button. Let's just stick with a UI view. We could do either, it's up to you, but we're gonna stick with a UI view in this case. Go ahead and do create that, make sure it's Swift, of course, and delete the default code that it gives in here. And let's think about this. So this one needs to have a square border. When we tap it, we want to show the check image, and the check should kind of be going over the border so it kind of looks nicer. So let's think about how to create that. So first things first, we want to override the initializer. Nothing new here. We want to add the required initializer so it doesn't yell at us. We also want to be implementing layout subviews, which we'll do in a moment. And before we lay the subviews out, we need to talk about what subviews we need. So what subviews do we need? We need an image view. And this image view is going to be the actual check mark. And it's going to be an SF symbol that I'm going to grab in just a moment. So let's go ahead and create this. And we're going to give it a content mode, content mode of scale aspect fit. And we're also going to give it a tint color. And I'm going to stick with, let's go with system blue since we've got a blue theme going on. And the actual image is going to be a SF symbol. And it's going to be a UI image with a system name. And I want to say it's called checkmark, but let's just open up SF symbols and take a look. And if you're not familiar with SF symbols, it's Apple's symbol catalog, and you can download this app to look up these symbols for free right on Apple's own website. So let's see, what do we have in here? So we have check mark, we have just a check here. You could also use this, this check mark with the shield, which kind of looks cool. They've also got the circular one. It's really up to you. I kind of like this one also. It really depends what you're going for. Let's actually stick with this one, and maybe I'll do an example with this one too, depending on how much time this one takes. So this one is called just checkmark. Now, what else do we need? We need a border, which is going to be the square border, but we don't want this to be the border of the actual container view here. And the reason is that we want the border and the check mark to be inside this. So what does that actually mean? So we're going to add a background color so you guys can see what I'm talking about, because it's kind of hard to talk about in the abstract. And in here, we're also going to say add subview of the image view. And this image view will be hidden by default. And we also want to bring in here is checked like we had in the other one, which is also going to be false by default. And we're also going to want to add a function on here called toggle, just like the other one. And here we're going to assign it to be the inverse of is checked, just like that. So we're going to say is checked, make sure this is a var so it can be assigned to. And here we would update the UI. So in this case, the UI would be image view is hidden is going to be is checked. So go ahead and hit Command B. Let's see if we have any errors. We should not have any errors. So let's see, is hidden. So this actually should be true by default. So let's say is, the reason I'm thinking this should be true by default is because if we say is hidden is false, even though it says is checked, it actually checks it. So what we want to do here is actually assign it to the inverse of the bool. So hopefully I explained that well, because it was a little bit of a flip of the actual bool check. But before we go ahead and do that, let's add this to our view controller and let's explain why we want to create another subview inside of that other view. So let me go ahead and simply copy and paste this. And we're going to go ahead and let me grab that label too, actually, right above it. Let's grab this whole thing, paste that there, make this label 2, label 2, label 2, checkbox 2, gesture 2, checkbox 2, and gesture 2. And we're going to go ahead and create a checkbox 2 up here. And this is going to be a checkbox button, which is our other view. Let's make sure we've got all this copy and paste working correctly. Let's see, we've got this should be label 2. We want to say add subview, label 2. Looking good. We want to change the Y value here. I'm going to make this 300. And I'm also going to make the Y value up here for the checkbox 2 to be 300. And we're also going to want another function for checking the other box. So I'm going to say did tap checkbox 2. We're going to say checkbox 2 toggle and make sure we change this one here. So just to visually separate these, this is checkbox 2. Go ahead and hit Command R. Let's see what that looks like. We expect to see a label and a checkbox right below it. So we see the label and we see this red square. Now, if you notice, if we have the border on this red square and we make the check image inside of it and we make the check go a little bit over the top border, if we have any other views around it, it might clip that check. And that's the reason we're going to want to add another border inside of that checkbox. In other words, we've got this image view that we're adding here. Let's make is hidden true by default here. And let's also lay out this image view. We're going to say its frame is going to be CZRect 0, negative 10, and width. And in this case, this would be height. And if you actually go ahead and take a look at this by hitting Command R, let's see, we don't have our check showing up because I just set this to be true, which we want to do afterwards. So just make it false just to see as we're building it. You see the check mark looks kind of cool if this had a border, and the check is going a little bit over the edge, which is kind of how it's supposed to look. But watch what happens as soon as we do clips to bounds, and we assign that to true. You'll notice a check mark is going to be cut off at the bound of the containing view. And that's not what we wanted to do. And we want to make sure that the check mark doesn't actually overlap any views that are going to be next to this box. And that's my long-winded explanation about why we're going to need another subview in here. And this is going to be box view. And it's simply going to be a UI view. And the purpose of this box view is basically what the name implies. It's just going to be a box. So we're going to add a layer, and we're going to say border width is going to be 1, and we're going to say view layer border color is going to be UI color label.cg color. And I think that's all we want to do. Here we want to say add subview, box view. Make sure that you add the box view before you add the image view so the image is on top of the box on the Z axis. Then you want to say box view frame, and we want this to be inside the container. So what we want to do is we want to say this is 5, 5, width minus 10, and then the height will also be width minus 10, and the frame of this image view can now be bounds. So go ahead and run it, and let's see what that looks like. All right, so we still have a box in here. We have the check mark being a little larger than the white box, but you'll notice that nothing is clipped now on the edges because the red container is the container of the whole thing, and the white box is inside of it. And if we want, we can actually even make this smaller by pushing a 10 in and subtracting 20 from the width and height. And if we run that, you're going to go ahead and see that now the check mark is a little too large, so we might have to play with these numbers a little bit. Let's go with 7, and we'll stick with 7 regardless how it looks for the sake of time. But you can really customize exactly how this looks and the colors and all that good stuff. So I think 7 will probably be more of what we're going for. All right, perfect. I think the check should be moved up a little bit, but I'm not going to spend more time on that. So let's go ahead and get rid of the background color here, which is red, which we assigned right there. Let's get rid of that. By default, this should be hidden. So we're going to say is hidden is true. And every time we tap on this, we should show and hide the check mark, which we're already doing. And the reason we're already doing that is because we implemented this toggle function, which goes ahead and flips the bool for is checked, and then it hides and shows the image view based on that bool. So if we tap it, we get it checked, or we can uncheck it. Some people like the check to be inside the box. It's really subjective design, but there you have it. Those are two different approaches to creating a checkbox, either as a circular little box here or a legitimate box. Now, another thing I'll mention, or the last thing I'll mention before wrapping up this video is some people like to abstract this is checked business out of the view and create a view model out of it. And for example, if you wanted to put this view in like a table view cell, you have to be careful of when you scroll the cell off screen and the cell resets. When it scrolls back onto screen, you want to make sure that you persist the state of the actual checkbox. So what you could do here is you can say is checked, and every single time that you want to reuse this view, you can basically decouple the view and the view model, which holds the state of the checkbox. Another thing that people do is if you want the state of the checkbox to be represented in a better way instead of true or false, you can say case checked, unchecked, or disabled in case you want a checkbox to be disabled in your form. And based on is disabled, you can just not do anything in this toggle function. So there you have it. There's a lot of little nuances to how you can set this up and visually design it and all that good stuff, but fairly simple to create a checkbox. Apple doesn't have one by default in UIKit, which is a little unfortunate. I know Swift UI is making things like this a lot easier and better, but definitely not a lot of code for your current legacy projects that are built with UIKit. If you haven't smashed the like button already, make sure to do so for the YouTube algorithm. Helps out video engagement and helps me make more videos for all of you. Comment down below if you have any questions, concerns, video suggestions, if you just want to say hi. Love hearing from you guys, and it helps with video reach too. I try to reply to every comment reasonably quickly. And of course, don't forget to hit that subscribe button to stay tuned for updated videos and uploads. Hit that notification bell while you're at it, and you'll get a notification for when I upload. So thanks for watching. I'll catch you in the next one.